Okay, it is officially 2 o'clock, and I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I want to thank everyone for showing up. Welcome to our first ArcSite Essential Webinar. We're starting these as a series of webinars that we're going to sort of do some deep dives into specific functionalities in the app. The goal of which is to make sure that you know, one, that these things exist, and that two, that you know best, you can figure out best ways of using it for your own work. So today, I'm familiar with a lot of you folks. My name is Patrick. I have with me Andrew, who's my cohort here at the ArcSite. Let's go ahead and just talk a few housekeeping here at the beginning. You can ask questions. There's a Q&A button on the Zoom panel that you got. We'll take questions throughout the webinar, and we'll also have a specific Q&A at the end. We're going to record it, and so we'll send a link if you wanted to go back and watch it later. I'm going to do most of the talking, but Andrew will be collecting your messages and questions as we go, and may jump in and out. So feel free to do so. And the last note here is that due to COVID and its situation, we are both working from home. So please pardon any dog barking or children screaming or anything like that. Hopefully that'll be a minimum, but that's life today. So to just talk a little bit about the agenda, our main focus today is on ArcSite shapes. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the recently added functionalities, as well as that QA portion. We also value your time, so if there's questions outside of that scope, we're happy to answer them, and that's part of this overall thing. So on to shapes. I was looking at the list there when people were coming in. I know most of you are probably very familiar with them and may use them on every time you use the ArcSite, but they're seemingly pretty simple and straightforward, but they're pretty powerful, and there's a number of ways you can use them in a variety of different contexts and situations. So wanted to drill into some of that, as well as they can be customized in a number of different ways to provide additional functionality that you may not know about or just may not be immediately apparent. So while the first part of the discussion may be very old hat to many of you, I will cover them from simple to advanced. So hopefully there'll be some value somewhere along that line. In regards to shapes, I'm going to go ahead and get started on them. We're going to cover what they are, how to access them, use them, those straightforward things. And we're going to talk about creating your own and customizing in general, the options therein. We have some special kind of shapes, ones with automatic numbering and shapes you can add labels to. So we'll talk about those. Then we'll talk about openings, which is a very specific kind of shape we already have in the app. Then I want to talk a little bit about some of the uses beyond the obvious. Things like creating a set for the entire company, if you have a team, that can be shared and owned by a single person. And converting them into what we call products so that you can create automatically takeoff schedules, material lists, customer proposals. So what are they? Their shapes are just simply symbols that can be created once, saved once, and then used repeatedly for anything that you want to visually represent in your work. And these save time, obviously, because you don't have to redraw it every time. They can bring a lot of consistency to your work and reduce the amount of miscommunication. They can help all your drawings and or your team's drawings be consistent across the board. And so you and your client and the install guys and the subs and the office, everybody can be aligned that this is what these visual means for every job. We can also use them to collect quantities and other attributes for material lists and calculate pricing for estimates simply just by adding them to the screen. So we'll go through that as well. So start again, real simple. Here's a screenshot showing how you access them. So we have a toolbar on the right. There's a shape icon. You tap on it. It opens up this shape panel on the left. Currently, what we're looking at is the ArcSite basic shapes. what ships with every version of the product. If you want to see what else is available, you can click on this arrowhead icon and it will show what's currently available. So I'm still in the ArcSite basic selection. You can see them here, but there's a section called My Shapes. This is where any shape that you create is going to end up being placed. And additionally, I have one that's called Kitchen. So we have upwards of about 1,700 shapes that are categorized and grouped into types and industry or whatever. And you can add those into your account. And to do that, so I've added one called Kitchen here. To do that, you click on this Get More Shapes button right here. And it's going to bring up a list of a whole bunch of them. And you just click Add to add them, and it'll get added to your account. In this case, you can see that I've added Kitchen, so I could remove that one, whereas I can add the others. Once I've done that, then they're going to start just showing up in that list. So you can start using them, which leads me to the simplest thing, which is actually using these guys. Once you have the shape panel open, you can have groupings that you can look through, the HVAC versus this interior design, and you can look at them that way. We have a search bar where you can type in a name to find shapes based on that name, or just simply scrolling through the list to look at them visually. In this case, I've added a chair, and all I do is tap on it. So that's all there is to adding. So we won't spend much time talking about that. I'm actually now going to jump over to the app and talk a little bit about the creation side of things and that piece. So,
Patrick, before you jump in there, we had a couple questions.
Awesome.
One being on the shape libraries, so the kitchen, foundation, those added shape libraries. Is there any limit to the number that you can add?
Nope. You can add them all. They will all be added, and you'll have them all available to you. We'll talk about ways of sort of using these shapes libraries as well, because it may be that you don't obviously need all 1,700. So we'll talk about creating your own little subset. But initially, you can add as many of those as you want.
Awesome. And in terms of what those include, we had a question about staircases for one instance. Do we get into that level of detail? Staircases and stuff along those lines, or can you give me some more insight as to maybe what
Sure.
some of those shapes include?
So I did see that from John. I absolutely would love to get with you and talk about those needs. We have 1,700. I'm sure we could easily have 5,000. So the part, not to not answer your questions specifically about the staircases, but to throw out there that we're always looking on how to expand out these things. And in a lot of cases, we don't know what would be the most important ones to add. So we sort of trickle these in as time goes on. And I'm going to actually reach out to you, John, and we'll talk about that. If someone else asks about that as well, we don't have one specifically to staircases, but that's a really good example of one that we ought to add. So we'll work with you and get them in there.
Awesome. Those are the couple that we had thus far. So I'll let you jump back in.
Okay, cool. So in terms of shapes, first we'll just talk about what how can they appear. So I've got a couple examples here. I have a very simple. I've got a circle that I drew, or some text with a box around it. They can be really simple like that. They can be more elaborate or more realistic looking. Here's an example of a refrigerator and a piano. They can be simple colors. Like, again, here's just a black line, or they can be full color. I mean, they can indicate a single object. This could be, some specific piece of equipment, or you can make them such that, you can essentially use them as sort of building blocks to recreate existing structures. So I'm going to correct here, start building out my fence line here just by adding this over and over again. How they appear, totally up to you, and it really kind of whatever matches your workflow. What are you going for there? In regards to creating them, they're all created the same way. You select something that's on the screen already, and then you say, make this a shape. That can be done from several different places. One, I could draw it. I draw this circle right here. And the next one goes to what I was just talking about. As I add these additional groupings of shapes, this is an additional one I added. I could add one and then save it, and then it'll go into my shape bucket. So we'll talk about that in a minute. I also have an image. I can go grab something from my library or take a photo and just add it in. In this case, I have this logo here. So however you get them in here, once it's on the screen, the process is the same. And I'm going to go through that. I'm going to select this circle. And after I select it, I get an option over here to create a shape. So when I tap on it, I have to provide a couple of pieces of information. One, I have to give it a name, and I have to spell it right. So we can't help you if you're a bad speller, sorry. You can turn on that remember size and unit. That's kind of important here. I'm going to toggle this option on. What that means is when it's toggled on, every time I drop it on the screen, it's going to come in at the size I created it at. So you can do it that way, or you can do it where it doesn't. But you might get some weird sizes if you don't have a particular size. So I've turned that on. And last, I want to talk about snap points. I can tap on the actual image or that where it says edit snap points, and it's going to bring up a big version of it. And the purpose here is you want to tell the computer, when I'm using this shape, and I come across another object, where should this snap? So to make that a little clearer, I'm going to go through an example. Let's say for this shape, I always want the center of this shape to snap to a wall. Well, actually, we sort of indicate on the screen where it is already, but I can tap right there, and I can tap right there. I can add as many as I want. And then I'll actually show you how it works. But after I've defined those things, I click done. So I've got my shape where I want it. I'm going to go ahead and click create. And so by doing that, now I should have things in my shape bucket. In this case, I already had that fence section, but I just added that circle. So that's the whole extent of adding a shape. So if I add it to the screen, there it is. I'm going to make another example. As I mentioned, you can come in and grab something in one of these libraries. Go back to interior. Grab the dryer. And that came from the interior library, but now I can save it as my own. I'm going to click on the create, go through that same process, give it a name. I am going to say, remember the size and unit. And for something like this, it's likely that this top part is where it's going to back up against the wall. So I'll put some snap points there in the back. I didn't have to. I could put one single in the center. However you want to do it, that's fine. I'm going to click on done to save that, and then create to save it as a shape. So once again, when I go to my shape bucket, I will now have the dryer. And so what's great about this is as you build up these shapes and create them and borrow them from the other library, essentially creating just a subset that's important to you, which, as you said, you can add all those libraries, but then if you're going to keep them all, you're going to be popping around to do different things. So combining them all in this My Shape bucket is a really nice way of getting access to them easier. While I'm here and talking about that, right now I am on the current All Shape tab. So I will see everything. There is also one down here called Recent. And what that's going to do is show me all of the recently used shapes. So if you just ended up using one, you can come over here and tap on that and grab that one. I'm going to stay in the All Shapes though, and do one more shape creation. That's this image again that I've added from my library. I'm going to select it. Once it's selected, this could be a photo, this could be this sort of thing, whatever the case. It's the same process. I can go through it, name it, size it, snap it, and I'm good to go. And it will be now in my shapes bucket. I do want to say also that if you have in your organization or in your company or however you are, if you have existing symbols, you can reach out to us directly and we can work on adding those to your account. We have our contact information in the email that's going out. So if interested, let's have that discussion. There's no sense in you not using what you already have.
One quick question, Patrick. Can you explain a little bit, if you were to add an image like you have, the Acme Anvil Corporation, is that how I would then add my logo to my drawings to make it more of like a branded drawing then for myself?
Sure, sure. There's several answers here. On a higher level subscription, you can add a logo for the output. If you're on the subscription that doesn't have that, this is certainly a good way to do this. And you can extend that out to beyond just the logo. You could have a block of text that you want to use. It could be your company's name. Whatever's on the screen, you can put on the screen, you can save as a shape. Actually, there's only one exception, and I'll bring it up because I don't want that to come up. If I create a wall segment, that's the only thing that we can't use in a shape right now. Everything else that's on the screen you can save, and then you can sort of brand out your drawing based on adding in of just a few shapes.
Awesome.
That's it for right now?
Yep.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit, now that we've created some, let's also talk about editing. So I'm going to go grab one from my shape library. I'm going to go grab one from here. I'm going to grab what I call a access control panel. And once I've added a shape, there's a number of ways that I can change how it appears. There's very simple ways, and then there's a more granular, more complex way of changing it. I'm going to cover both those somewhat briefly. So I've added that one on the screen. The app sees this, even though it looks like a box with the letters in it, it sees it as a single object. So without adjusting it and changing that underlying single piece, I can make some simple changes just by, in the case of I can come and grab from a corner to resize it proportionally. Alternatively, I could grab one of these axes. I'm going to tap on the 17.2. Well, I missed it. There we go. Bring up that number pad and change, just one of the axes. So there's that. And then I can change by using the color and style in the lower left corner. I can change, make changes to the whole of it. Like this, now I can change it to all blue rather than all red. I could actually change the line style and whatnot. So I can make some changes to it, how it appears. What I will note is that when I make a change to a shape on the screen, I'm not changing the underlying one that was created in the library. I'm changing the one I've already got on the screen. So if you like these changes and you want to keep this as a separate shape, you can go through the same process, select it, create it as a shape. Back to editing though. So that's when I still have it as a shape, I can make some changes to it. I can also then do what we call just sort of break it apart into its individual component pieces that were used to create it. And I do that very simply by having it selected, going to my more icon, and it says explode. In a couple of weeks, it'll say break apart. It's the same option here. If I click on explode, it's now, even though it looks the same, if I come and tap on it now, you can see that there are individual pieces to this. So this allows me to do much more different kind of changes. I could change the text. I could change an individual line length without affecting the other ones. I can change the individual colors. I could do fill. This is a common one that I hear because when it's still a shape, even though it looks like it's an area that can be filled, the app doesn't know it's there's a place to fill. So if I break it apart, now I just have a closed area, a rectangle, and I can come do a fill on it. So it's something to think about as you're using those, and there's the case to be made to do a fill in area. Just break the shape apart and do the fill afterwards. So that's pretty much on an editing a shape. So I did briefly mention this, but I want to talk about these. So we have some special kinds of shapes that you yourself can create that allow some additional functionality besides just the visual. And so we're going to talk about numbered and label shapes. When I go to this, I'm actually now turning this into what we call a product. And why that's significant is that it's accessed somewhere else. Up until now, all my shapes have been in this shape library. once I change it into a product, and we will talk a little bit more about what a product does and what it enables, I do access it differently. I come to this top icon, and I just have a few set up in here. And the two that I want to talk about right now, the first one is the product with a label. So if I drop this on the screen, you can sort of see over here, obviously, but also here, sort of a almost disabled looking X. If I tap away, you don't see it. However, what this enables is, if I have it set up this way, I can come over to my attributes button here on the left, and I can type in a label that when I save it, it'll show up next to that instance of the shape. So why that's useful is now you can do a lot more granular description of one of the shapes or multiple of the shapes already on the screen. So there's a lot of uses for that. And if I copy it, it would keep that, but I can always go then in and change it. So I'm sure in your own ways, in your own workflows, there's probably some things that you could think about how you could use this extra level of detail just by adding that label. Very similar to that is the product with a number. So I'm going to tap on that guy, add it to the screen. Actually, I added two of them. What that did was add a number to it. So the first one gets in, there's a 1, second one, 2, 3, 4, and continuing. This also, obviously there's some uses for it. You can use this as a visual way to indicate a specific object on the view. So you're talking to your crew or you're talking to your client. You can talk about triangle number 3 rather than that triangle at the bottom. So you can add these in. If I delete one, I can just go add another one and it'll pick up that number. So you can always have that sequential numbering in the app. The way that they're being displayed here with the label right up against the bottom of that one in that color and the number at the bottom left, that's the way I set it up. You can set those up in any way, any location, any size. This is just the way that I set them up for this description, for this demo. Let's see, what do I want to talk about next?
Patrick, before you jump further, can you, is adding the number the same process as adding a word label as well?
There's
text label.
It is in some ways, and I can, let me just talk to it real quick. There is, actually you can see it over here in this small display. Let me make this bigger so we can see it better. When you create a number-based shape, you're going to add this sequence of digits here. This is the hash, SEQ capitalized hash. What that does, and then you save the entire piece as the shape. What that does is tell the app that this is one that needs a number. So you'll never see this on the screen, but when you drop it in, it'll have that number based on where you place it. Very similar on the label side, you define a label placement, and then when there's an additional step where you go and add an attribute that says label. I can send out a quick little cheat sheet on both of those, because probably by the time you get around to it, it'd be something you'd want to just go through the 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. Just a slight variation on the creation of the product / shape. So hopefully that makes sense. Yep. And we can take it away. It's definitely, Andrew can capture that and we can send that to everybody, but specifically whoever asked that question. Okay, so we've talked about those. And I did want to, so the next thing I did want to talk about is openings. This might be very familiar to everyone as well. Much like the shape, openings are a visual indicator that you can access here from the toolbar right above shapes. It opens a similar kind of panel. There are some differences to this. One, they are only doors and windows. And when used in conjunction with a wall segments like I have here, it has additional functionality. So I'm going to show you that rather than talk to it. I come here, I'm going to select this single door. If I drag it straight up against that wall, it's going to break that wall. So if this was a shape that looked like a door, it would sit on top of that wall. This one actually breaks it and breaks it into 2 segments. And I can move it around and change that Additionally, if I use a window, it's going to snap into there. So visually, it's very appealing. It then gives you a better dimensioning of those individual wall pieces. It also has one additional piece that the shapes don't have. So if I select this, any object I select is going to have some active things around it. This one adds this additional icon here that allows you to choose how the door is going to open. And that's the same for most of these. Some of the windows doesn't make sense, but for most of these, you can really kind of dig down into how the door will appear, which is just simpler than the old way of dropping the door on it and then having to mirror it and flip it and whatnot. So you can just kind of change that direction that way. Otherwise, they're very similar to shapes, and there's not much to go into here. You cannot currently create your own openings. However, and I'll make this abundantly clear, if there are things that are missing and you guys want added, please let us know, because we can create them and add them in. I think we have a good starting set, and we'd love to hear if there's other ones that are needed. So I'm going to move on from sort of the creation piece into I guess a slightly different creation aspect. I've been talking about how you can create your own shapes and combine them that way. You can also, if you have multiple licenses, sharing your symbols across the licenses is obviously a good idea. And what we can do is create a library that's shared among all your own individual accounts, not with everybody in the world, just with you guys. So in this case, I've created one called Acme Security. I go to it, and it's going to have the ones that I've created and then shared into my company. So I don't have many here, but they work exactly like the other shapes. You can have a single person manage it, and then all the people in the field or all your coworkers get the advantages of using them. And with that, let's also then just talk about a little bit about a takeoff or material list and how shapes can play into that. I'm going to go back into products, because this is another case to be made for using a product. I have this one that says panic button. If it was just a shape, I could drop it on the screen and it would visually indicate a panic button. But when you create what's called a product, you can actually have additional questions that you need to answer or can answer in the field based on dropping this in. So I've dropped this in, I come to my attributes, and I'm getting the quantity automatically. And you can set up other questions that'll, information that will automatically be collected. But what I'm showing here is some of the questions that I preset, and now I can answer about this. In this case, is this device new or existing? I'm going to say it's an existing one. I can add a model, make and model. Is it wireless? I can have a field just here as an open-ended paragraph. I can put in some notes, and I can even add photos. So I can take a picture of the thing that I'm looking at, and it'll get captured and associated with that particular instance of that particular product. So I'm going to save and close. And to show you the in-app version of what I've been collecting, I am going to open up a new dialog. I come up here to this toolbar icon and pick take off an estimate. And you can see that I'm starting to build out a list of the things that I've added to the screen. And in the case of the panic button, it's also collecting those additional questions that I answered. This is the view inside the app. The useful part to this is for a material list is after I get finished and upload it to a cloud, I can actually print out what we call a takeoff report or a material list. And I'm going to switch over to the other to give you just a flavor of that. Where is there it is. So here's an example. I've drawn up this diagram with some equipment on it. And then here is just a screenshot of the takeoff itself, shows the sign, the symbol, the name. It's also got all these other pieces of information. In this case, I asked the type, model, and spacing. So this is just another output that you can hand off to, say, the crew to know what to put on the truck, or to send to a vendor for ordering purposes, whatever the case may be. It comes automatically once you've added these products and uploaded the drawing itself. Go back over here, because on a similar note, we can talk about one of our newer features, which is the estimate, the client proposal piece. And so I've created a product to talk to that, because what that enables you to do is put pricing as well into these shapes that you're adding to the screen, and then being able to then output a proposal directly from the app. And for that one, I created this one that's the bullet camera, so I can add it to the screen. And unlike the panic button, I'm not going to go answer questions about the object or the size and type, but I am going to answer some questions about the pricing. So in the same way, I'm going to come over to my attributes button, and it don't have a price yet because I haven't answered this question. And this question here is, which model am I putting in? So this is just one of many potential kind of ways you can put it in, but I'm just going to say that's this guy. I save it and close it. And now when I come up back to that, what we call the summary page I showed a minute ago, you can see the bullet camera's in there now, and it has a pricing of $550. There's a lot more to the takeoff and the proposal side of things that I'm not going to cover today, but I did want to show how you can use the shapes to enable those functionalities. So I'm going to close this guy back down. And, oh, yeah, and actually I have a picture here, again, of, these are just two screenshots from the same proposal. But here, again, are those products I added. And there are their comparable pricing information that's been automatically added as well. Now that I have covered those, I've actually already covered everything I was going to talk about for shapes. Hopefully that was useful. Hopefully it spawned some questions. I'd love to answer those as we go. But I am going to kind of transition a little bit, and I want to talk about some of the things that we've done in the recent months. I don't have time to go through each one of these, but I definitely did want to put some up here. This is not an exhaustive list, but it is a good sampling of some of the things we've done over the last X number of months. And it is our mission now to be a lot more transparent and a lot more proactive in pushing these sorts of information out to you guys, because you're paying for this product, but nobody has time to find out about these things. So that's one of the goals of this webinar and our outreach moving forward, is to make sure that you're aware that these things exist, because we've added a lot. We have full-fledged whole new functionality with the customer proposal, but we also have, oh, I forgot to show this. Let me see. Here's another, just a small but very useful addition. When I add these products to the screen, I can also automatically generate a legend. So what it's going to show here is all the products that I added. So that's an example of a smaller size improvement that's brand new. On top of that, though, we got a lot of improvements to existing functionality. We have a great relationship with you guys. I hear a lot of feedback, and we hopefully are doing some of those things that have been, pain points and things. We upload an entire project at once. You can choose the number of photos per output page. You can paste things to lock layers. We have more colors, more style defaults, improved fill tool. I could go on and on. Again, I don't have time to cover all these here, but again, wanted to put them out here. Love to hear if there's questions either here in this session, or if you see something in here that you want to drill into, we can do that outside of this as well. So with that said, I am at the point where I would love to open this up to questions, either about what I've covered or anything that you would like to know. And I will also just show you that we do have both of our direct emails and direct phone numbers. We're very open to having those conversations when and whenever that makes sense to you guys. Excuse me, I'm gonna drink some water.
Patrick, I did have a question come in just a second to go. So just wanted you to review if you could. Could you jump back into the app real quick and just show us why we can't use the fill option to fill a shape with our color, for instance,
Sure,
and can show the process of being able to do that?
sure. So let's just take that one I used previously. It looks like it has an area that can be filled logically. But what happens when we create a shape, we turn all those individual pieces into a single item. That's why if I select it, you get this outline on the whole thing. So the app, excuse me, app sees it as a single object, and it doesn't see that there's an area to be filled. So that's why what you want to do in that situation is once you've dropped it on the screen, I can come over to my More button. And this, I mentioned this term is actually changing like this week. Right now it says explode, and the next week it'll say break apart. But it's the same behavior. I select that, and by doing so now, it's not a single piece, it's a whole bunch of individual pieces. And so by doing so, I've now defined an area within this rectangle that could be filled because this is a sealed object. Anytime I have a sealed object, I can use this fill option. And this is one of those new fill things that we did not too long back, which is essentially if I have a closed area, all I gotta do is tap on one spot to fill it. I can come in here and I can change the color and the transparency however I want it to look, and then I just tap in the center, and there you go. And then I just accept it here at the bottom and do that. So that is that is a common thing, and I completely understand why it doesn't make sense, but that is the solution, is when it's a shape, break it apart and then fill it. And on a very close tangent, I'll bring it up because it's so similar. We've added another thing where you can add a rectangle as a drawing tool. So let me use that. And there is a reason it is sort of related here. I can just quickly draw out an area without having to draw each of the four corners, right? So by doing this, I've got this nice rectangle. However, just like a shape, it thinks it's a single object. So in the case when you're using this rectangle tool to quickly draw out those rectangles and squares, if I want to then fill it or do other things individually, I would do the exact same thing. I would select it, come over to here and say explode. And at that point, I can do my fill as well.
Awesome. I think, John, if you have additional questions on that process, certainly chime back in. Another one, Patrick, can you show us again how you create the live legend using the products?
Sure. Yeah, I didn't actually show that, so that's a good one to. If you get lost in a thing, here's a little tip. You can go here and go project, bring it back in, and it's going to zoom you back in. Probably knew that, but it's certainly something I use all the time. So let's say we have this little room here, and actually I'm going to just create a new drawing. Let's do it from scratch. Go ahead and draw myself a little rectangle. I'm going to go add a couple of products. I'll add one of those and one of these and one of these. So then just by doing that, now I have products on the screen, which is different than using a shape. If I use a shape, I can add it certainly, but the difference is when in the context of creating this legend, shapes won't show up in it, products will. So let's talk that through. I've added these. I come to this menu right here. And thus far, I've been going straight to this takeoff estimate summary screen, but it's right here that you can create what says create legend table. It defaults to that. You can resize it. You can change the name that shows up there and the number of columns. So there is some customization you can do. But as you can see, it's a one-to-one to the products that I've added, but not the shape. So that's how you add that. And then let's say I do, I've added one more. So in that case, I just come back into that same drop down and say refresh, and it'll add that one. once it's added, you know, you can put it wherever you want, and there it is.
Perfect. Currently don't see any additional questions. Maybe just give it a couple more minutes if anybody else here has
And
some
I'm going
last
to
questions here.
put Andrew on the spot. He now has to like give us a joke or sing us a song.
Well, maybe Meredith bailed me out. She just asked another question. So if we have a certain level of service to be able to create products. So maybe jump into that real quick, Patrick.
Sure. The products are at a higher level right now. We have 4 different levels. The 2 top tiers are the ones where products are at. Love to work with you on that. We're happy to take your money, but at the same time, we also, that's a joke, I'd love to work with you specifically. And, you know, I do want to put out there that I see some people have been on here forever. So thanks for the business. I mean, we really do appreciate it. But yeah, the products are at the 2 top tiers. We can send a link to that and talk about that. But I won't go into a pricing conversation at this point.
So, and then last one was, you know, there's some people who jumped in here towards the end, and we were just curious if we did record this and if we were planning on sending this out afterwards.
Absolutely. As long as we know who you are, we will, and I think that's a given. We are recording this. We will place it somewhere that you can access it and send that link out shortly after this is over. Probably tomorrow. We'll have access there. I'm happy to go back over stuff. We scheduled this for an hour. So we actually have scheduled another 18 minutes. So I'm happy to just sit here and stare at my screen for a little while if you want to formulate questions, and completely understand if you want to drop off. My goal, of course, our goal here is to answer any and all that come.
Awesome. Meredith also asked Patrick, you know, what other Zoom calls we're planning to do in the coming weeks. So maybe you talk a little bit about our plan for the webinar series going forward. I know another individual had asked if we were planning to do another one of these soon.
Sure.
So I guess the answer is yes, we are, but you know, we haven't necessarily settled on a date, perhaps. I don't know if you want to chime in anymore there, but.
So I can talk to what I don't know, which is we haven't set a schedule or a cadence here. What we do know is we want to do these moving forward at a regular time. My imagine is this is maybe a monthly thing, although I don't know that for a fact. I also can think of several other topics that we could cover. One of the things I was going to do right here at the end was to put that out there, that, you know, we do this in order to bring value. So if there's things that you want to drill into, we're happy to do that. We're thinking that we do deep dives like we did here, but that's only, you know, our initial thought. So in the email, we'll certainly put this in. If you have feedback on, you know, how I sound like Ray Romano and that's really annoying, or if you want to cover some particular topic, please let us know. You know, that sort of feedback is great to hear. So answer with a non-answer in some ways.
And then Patrick, we just got asked, is there any way to have client or company info print on the drawing, perhaps?
So yeah, sure. Let's jump back over here because that image actually is showing. I didn't go into this, but on the proposals, you can output, you can, at the beginning, you, depending on your subscription level, if you're on the subscription level that uses the information, when you create a project, you're asked to enter in client details. straight from the beginning. And so that details then gets pushed into the output proposal. So you can enter in the client's address and phone numbers and stuff, a job site address as well. And it also then shows your particular information on here. If outside of this functionality, you could certainly affect the same thing by, you could create a shape that has sort of those title block or client information things, and then break it apart and change that in the drawing itself. Just to clarify that, I could have something that says, right, and you can imagine quite a bit more. That could be saved off as a shape, and then when you drop it on the screen, you could just select it and break it apart and then type in that information in the moment there. So both of those are options in terms of getting that client data on the screen.
Perfect. And we did have a question on product creation.
Okay.
Now that we're kind of at the end, we can certainly jump into that. But in terms of setting up a product, how could you set the scale for a pattern? And maybe Ryan, if you could maybe type back in an example of a pattern or something like that you'd like. But yeah, the question, Patrick, was from Brian. He said, how do you set the scale for a pattern when creating a product?
So you set, there are, excuse me, there is the ability to set a pattern, right? So I can choose from one to many of these things here. And I have one of these hatch patterns right now. I can change the color. But in terms of the scale, how it's appearing here, we have right here in the fill settings dialog, the ability to let me actually, I'll add it and then change that scale so you can see it. So I'm gonna tap in there to get it there. And save it. And I could have done that in that setting dialog, but I want to do it this way so you can see as it changes. I'm going to bring that transparency down so we can actually see it. But I can change my scale here. That's a big jump, but I can, make it, let's say 0.4, right? So however you set that, either doing it before you put the pattern in or by coming to this color and styles, you can choose that scale option here in the settings to do it. And then, once I've done this, then I can save this as a shape. And then further, just on the terminology thing here, in order then you can turn it into a product as well. So when you create a product, you create the shape first, and then you turn it into a product, which we didn't cover here. And that might be a whole other topic here. Certainly we have some help documents and we're happy to talk to you offline, but talking about taking products, shapes, and turning them into products, that whole sort of pricing thing could be another topic. It's pretty exciting. Actually, you can use things beyond shapes. You could use linear drawing lines and areas and stuff. There's a lot of ways to capture pricing with shapes just being one of them. So hopefully I answered the question because I said a lot of words. But that's how you set a scale for that.
Awesome. And then a question was asked about when you explode your shape and then create a fill. Can you then also measure kind of the square footage of that exploded region? So the example was, the shape of a pool inside the concrete pool deck, kind of be able to get the square footage maybe of those individual components of that.
Sure. And I would do it just slightly different, but I do exactly what you're asking for. I'm not going to make a pool shape. I'm just going to give me a rectangle here. And then I'm going to explode it, just like we talked about. So now I have this area, and we want to capture that area. We've been talking about using the fill. Instead of using the fill, in this case, what you want to use is one of the measurement tools. So if I come to my measurement tool, we got a whole lot of those here. We have 4 different ways of capturing an area. The very similar to what I was just doing there is if I have a sealed object like this is my best bet, what we call the area pick internal point. Because all I do is I just tap right in the center or anywhere in there and I get that square footage. So you can use essentially that fill command, but doing it for a measurement context. You can use other ones. I could use the rectangle in this case because it is a rectangle. I can use my polygon tool to go along the edges. But if you're lucky enough to have a sealed object, that you can't beat this guy here and just tap one spot. And if you don't like the green at this point, you can come in there and change it. Anything that's on the screen can always be changed in the color and style. So at this point, I can change my color or whatever. So by default, the measurement tool is going to pick up that light green. Whereas when you're doing a fill, you can pick a color right off the front. But if you do a measurement, you're going to get your green color. If you want to change it, you come down to that styles.
I think that covers it. So I don't have any additional questions, and I think we're just approaching the time limit. So yeah, maybe just another quick minute for any last questions. But I think other than that, that's all we've got.
Yep. So I'll make the offer one more time. Love to hear feedback. Was this useful? How could it be more useful? Future topics. We're going to be going full steam ahead, coming up with our own ideas, but we'd love to hear from you. Please take us up on contacting us outside of this meeting if things have been brought up that you want to further delve into. And most of all, I really appreciate both your business and your time. Everybody stay safe, wash your hands, stay indoors. So we'll all be here next month to do this again. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sit here until the hour ends, but it's going to get a little quiet at this point. So happy to stick around and stare at my screen.
Cool. Well, again, thanks everybody for coming, and appreciate you guys' time.
Okay, let's do that, the fill one here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and show how to fill. A fill requires an area that is enclosed. If it has I'll show you what I mean. I have a box again, but is not completely closed, the app doesn't know where to stop. So if I tried to do a fill right now, it's going to tell me, well, I don't know what to do. So it does require a sealed object. And again, in the case of a shape or a rectangle, using a rectangle tool, you need to break that part into its individual pieces. But once I have that, I can come and use this fill command in a number of ways. The action to take here is simply to tap in the screen wherever you want to fill. But there's some options associated with this. I'm going to come down here to this little dialogue. This little thing here. I can choose a transparency. I can use a full color or a pattern. And if you want to see all the patterns, I can come and tap on that and kind of scroll through all these, a variety of them. So do that. I can add a border color. That border line can also be a variety of different types. Once I've done it the way I want it, I have a couple options. I can go back a step. I can exit out of this operation, or if I like what I got, I click on this little check mark, and there I go. So I have filled an object. Oh, okay. So if you have in a case of a crawl space, you may not have a complete, you might have an open side, And so in that case, let me make this suggestion. If you have, you know, this is the crawl space, and then the rest of the basement is over here. Instead of using the fill, you can again use that measurement tool and use it like a fill. So we talked about using the fill command sort of on the measurement side. That's what we talked about a minute ago. The opposite also works. So in this case, I want to just fill this left area with a color. So I can use either one of these things. Let's say I'm going to use this, we call a polygon, and I just fill in the area that I want to have filled. Now it is automatically, since I'm taking a measurement, it is going to show that square footage. But what I can do is, if I don't want to show the square footage, I can come in here and just delete it. So now I just have a filled area for the crawl space. And I can change it. And that's the version without a product. You can also define products to do the same sort of thing. I don't have any defined here in the list because we weren't really going to go into that side of things, but you can imagine you could have a product that's just an area-based one, where if I pick it, then I just define an area on the screen and it would come up with a pricing based on that. Hopefully that explains. If not, let's take that one offline. Yeah. Awesome. Tried the shape to product route and it left me stuck with a set shape. Not sure what you mean by a set shape, but I can talk to the process of moving from a shape to a product. Won't get very far into it, and this may have to be taken offline, but let me just go at a high level. As I mentioned, if you're going to create a product that's based on a shape, you have to create the shape first. So any shape will do. I can, use this guy right here. This is the side you're going to do in the app, is create the shape and have it available. When you actually turn it into a product, it is actually done in our browser-based, our user site. And I don't have that set up to go into. So again, maybe we should take this offline. And it definitely is a topic that we could cover in a future one. But now that I have my shape, I can go in the user site, say I want to create a product, pick that visual, and then sort of type in some pricing information. There's a couple of things you can enter in. And then bang, you got a product. And then you'll have them accessible from here. All right. All right, you too. In the parlance of our day, it looks like we're flattening the curve here. I'm going to call this a meeting. Again, those of you on, appreciate your time and look forward to talking to you next time. Did another one come in? Okay, Brian, why don't we take this off and I'll reach out to you directly.